From our 22 News Broadcast Center, this is 22 News in Focus. Today, the tragedy at Sandy Hook Elementary School. Here's Laura Hutchinson.
Good Sunday afternoon and welcome to 22 News in Focus. I'm Laura Hutchinson. On Friday, December 14th, an unthinkable tragedy happened in Newtown, Connecticut. A gunman killed his own mother, then went to an elementary school and killed dozens more people, including 20 children. This tragedy has shaken not only residents of the Newtown community, but people right here in Western Massachusetts are talking about it, as well as people around the world. Many people asking themselves why, wondering how this could have happened, how this is impacting children, and what we can do moving forward to prevent it from happening again. That's where 22 News in Focus comes in. Today we'll be talking about everything from guns and mental health to how our students are being protected locally. And we begin today with Springfield Police Sergeant David Kane, who leads the Student Support Unit within the department, and Springfield Public Schools Assistant Director of Safety and Security, Jack Vanoss. I want to thank you both so much for being here. I appreciate it. When you heard about what happened on Friday, I'm sure you were hearing it from both a human perspective and law enforcement, two people who work on protecting the children in the Springfield Public Schools. What was going through your mind as this was happening? Well,
immediately, your heart just drops. I'm a father of two young children. One in fourth grade, one in first, and all I could envision was something like that happening where they go. But also as a police officer who works in the schools, who is trained to deal with situations like this, you're thinking about it on two different fronts. And when it was starting to unfold, we were immediately in contact with each other and informing our subordinates as to what was going on. Not that we ever thought that there was a risk in Springfield, but just to keep them abreast that there is something taking place fairly close to us down in Connecticut, and we were monitoring that for the better part of the day and into the afternoon.
Pretty scary stuff, it really is. And as a police officer, I mean, when you hear these calls come in, shots fired near an elementary school, I mean, do you ever think that it could be something like what happened in Newtown?
We're always going to be prepared for something like that. This Friday kind of changed the game in terms of what we prepare for, but Sergeant Kane and I have been working, I don't want to wait for the next Columbine to occur, but we prepare for any kind of active shooter in a school, whether it's not necessarily the shooter him or herself, but we're prepared from our side of it. Like I said, a lot of what happened Friday kind of changed the book for a lot of us.
One thing we've been hearing a lot about is how heroic some of these teachers were. They knew exactly what to do. They got kids in closets. We heard all about that. Do you think our teachers and our schools are prepared to respond in such a way if something like that were to happen?
I think so. I think so, especially from the preliminary reports that have been coming in about that horrific tragedy. It's fairly evident to those in law enforcement that those teachers had extensive training on lockdown drills and procedures, and despite the fact that there was such horrible carnage, what they did absolutely saved more lives. Had they not had the training that they had, there could very well have possibly been double or triple the amount of casualties in that building.
Wow. How secure are our schools right now? That's the question a lot of parents are asking themselves. I mean, can we walk up to a school right now and just walk in the door? How secure are?
No, our schools are very secure. The drill, the plan that the staff in Connecticut had been trained in, we train our staff in on a regular basis. We drill on a regular basis. Sergeant Kane and I came from several drills today based on the presentation that I give them on lockdown drills. So not only are our buildings physically secure, but our staff is trained.
Are we talking about locked doors, cameras? I mean, what kind of security do our schools have today?
Well, I think an individual who hasn't been in an elementary school in a number of years would be surprised as to what measures have been taken since the Columbine tragedy over 10 years ago. It is commonplace now for cameras to be buzzed into the buildings, for doors that would normally have been unlocked 30 years ago to be locked and secured, while trying to also keep the building as safe as we can knowing that a lot of these buildings were designed 80 years ago when the architects back in the day never even had to fathom what we would have to be dealing with almost a century later.
Do you think that we're going to be seeing some changes moving forward? I mean, the scary part about this whole thing is that school appeared to be secured. It had locked doors, you know, it had teachers who were ready for this, and it still happened. So do you think that we're going to be seeing any more changes that, I don't know, could minimize something like this? I mean, you can't stop everything, of course.
Absolutely. I mean, we'll look at, and I would assume that every law enforcement agency throughout the country is going to look at the aftermath of this and look at the reports and look at what was done. And I'm quite sure that even in Springfield, we'll look at what they did in Newtown and say, you know what, that worked very well. We're going to adopt that. Or this is what they did, and I think we might change it a little bit to fit our needs up here. In any line of work, training is perpetual. It's always taking place. It never stops. There's always a need for training. And it's true in every line of work, especially in teaching and in police work. Even if this tragedy didn't take place, we would still be very serious about maintaining the policies, maintaining the drills, maintaining, looking forward and constantly trying to look to evolve our policies and procedures so that it stays modern and it stays fresh with all of us.
How can you make kids feel safe in school? I mean, did you do anything different this week? A lot of kids were on edge, you know, going to school. Parents were on edge sending their kids to school. Was there anything different that you did?
One of the things we did, our superintendent sent out a letter to our parents saying that in light of what happened Friday, we will be conducting drills. However, we've been conducting drills prior. Another thing that the police department's done is they're now more of a presence. Just the visual sight of a police officer kind of calms the children and the staff. We can attest to that, where we visit a lot of schools and the principal's like, thank you for bringing the police department, if for no other reason, just to stop in and say hi and, you know, we're here.
Right. I mean, the ultimate, ultimate safety, as you were saying, is, just having a police presence there. It makes everyone feel good, Budget-wise, is that really something that sounds feasible for many communities to do these days? Do you think that that is one of those changes we'll at least be working toward in the near future?
Well, when you look at the number of schools that are in Springfield, there are 21 officers assigned to the unit that are in the middle schools, the high schools, and the alternative schools. I supplement in the elementary schools as needed. There are also a handful of charter schools. We have St. Michael's Academy. Is it financially possible to put a police officer in every single school in the city? I don't think so. But what we are doing is the commissioner has implemented a policy that now all the sector cars that are working the regular beats are going to stop in every school in their sector at least once during their tour and stop in at the school and make themselves visible at alternate times. So it's staggered. So an officer will stop at one school at 8 o'clock in the morning, and tomorrow he'll stop in maybe at 1:30. So it may not be perfect, but just that sheer presence and knowing that the police officer is going to be stopping in at some point. And of course, if anything were to happen that would necessitate an immediate response, we absolutely would be there.
Right there, yeah.
I've visited about a dozen or so schools in the past day and a half with you. So
and that must be helpful not only to the students and the teachers, but also helpful to help them make them feel secure.
Oh, sure.
But also, as a police officer is a deterrent to any type of crime.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Springfield must be one of the most secure school districts in Western Massachusetts, right? I mean, talk to me about how many police officers you have in some of these schools already. This is something.
Oh yeah, we have, like I said, we have 21 officers assigned to the unit.
Right.
I have 2 officers at each high school. At some of the middle schools, I have 2 officers assigned to them. Every middle school, every high school, every alternative school has at least 1 police officer. And on days in which I have plenty of coverage, I will supplement and I'll have officers rove around to some of the smaller schools that we don't need to be at every day, but we need to pop in at. So we are very lucky in Springfield that the relationship that we have with the school department allows us to have so many officers in the schools. And I know that there are many people that are against having uniformed officers in the schools. I think if you were to take a poll with parents, most parents would want us there now.
Right.
And I have absolutely, and the commissioner has no intention of reducing the number of police officers in the schools. We have many roles, from bullying to law enforcement and to basic security, basic protection. There are 26,000 boys and girls that go to school in Springfield, and it's an awesome responsibility for myself and 21 officers to try and stay on top of that every day. And it's because of the hard work that Jack has done and the school department that allows us to, I don't want to say give us a false sense of security. We're constantly looking at how we can improve what we do. But especially after what happened Friday, it's very daunting. And I know that every morning when I go to work. And I thank God every day when I go home that the day is ending on a good note.
Very good. Sergeant Kane, Jack Van Oss, I want to thank you both so much for being here. It's really important to know what's being done and at least how you're thinking and what maybe we could look forward to in the future. You know, the safety and security of our students is very important. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Welcome. Appreciate it. And next, how schools are addressing the tragedy with students as well. Stay with us. You're watching 22 News in Focus. You're watching 22 News in Focus. Today we're talking about the horrible events that played out in Newtown, Connecticut last week. The images are traumatizing for everyone, whether you were there and lived through it or you were watching it from your TV at home. We all want to know our kids are safe. We just talked to two members of the Springfield Police Department about school security. Now let's talk about the conversations that may or may not need to happen with our kids. Joining us, we have Diane Vecchiarelli, who's with the Chicopee High School Guidance Department, the head guidance counselor. That's right. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it. You know, this just hits so close to home for so many people. You know, whether you have kids, many people do or not, it really does. How did this play out for you? So this happened on a Friday. Right. You come back to work on a Monday. What was the pulse of the school that day?
Sure. Friday, we had professional development, grades 6 through 12, so there was no students in the building. So when we found out the events, you know, it just unfolded, and you just, you know, it was as watching a movie. You really didn't believe it. But yes, when we got back on Monday, our superintendent, Mr. Rigi, had wanted as much normalcy as possible. So he, you know, we briefed, our principals briefed staff, and really discussed, you know, if students had questions. I work obviously at the high school level, 9 through 12, but if students, or even, you know, teachers, making sure if there are behaviors of students that they seemed upset or they seemed a little withdrawn. Because again, you know, this can trigger many tragic events for students on, you know, personal issues, you know, a tragic loss or something that happened many years ago, and this can, you know, bring it back up to the forefront. So, you know, we were readily available for any of the students that came down.
From what you know, how did kids handle it? Did any of them have any problems? You know, a few people need some talking to?
More so it was parents that just called and wanted more reassurance. I spoke with an elementary and our middle school colleagues and the counselors that I work with, K through 12, and it was a lot of parents just making sure that security procedures were in place, and that I think they wanted reassurance to know that when they left their child off to the bus stop, or that they dropped them off in front of the building, that at the end of the day they were going to be there to pick up.
Right. You know, just from contacting a couple of different school districts right after, I realized the majority of them appeared to be not having this conversation in the classroom, rather leaving it up to the parents. Is that the way that you think that should go? Is this a discussion that maybe older children, I can, you know, certainly the elementary school is a different ball game, you know, but even in the high school level, would you think that kids need to talk this out and have this conversation in the classroom?
Yeah, you know, I definitely feel that if, you know, it's a learn, you know, unfortunately, it's a learning tool, it's a learning discussion, it's an avenue of discussion. But I know the superintendent really wanted it to be more of an avenue of discussion at home, but certainly that, you know, if any students came down and that they really wanted to talk about it, that as long as, you know, and I've said it before, that we stick to the facts to really just try to hear out what they do know, and really kind of open up that discussion to see, you know, where they're coming from and what insecurities they may have.
How do you recommend parents go about this at home? Because they may leave the TV on, kids may see this. This is something,
Sure.
if it hasn't come up, it still may come up.
Right.
So how would you, suggest parents go
Sure.
about that?
I have a young son. He's in 3rd grade. So, you know, we were given some information, the National Association of School Psychologists, helping children cope. So it was a pamphlet. Actually, our building principal as well sent it to us. And it really just talked about seeing where the children really playing from their emotions. Where are they at? You know, and when I did talk to my son about it, you know, you want to know where is, you know, some of his information coming from, because he did ask a couple of questions, and then he said, you know, I'm kind of scared to go to school on Monday. And really, if anything, you want to drive home that reassurance that school is still that wonderful place to go to, that you're going to learn so much, that the staff there and your teachers are there to protect you and help you. In Chicopee Public Schools, we also have an interesting dynamic that we have a preschool in our building. So there are 2.9 to 5-year-olds in our building, and they go through the drills that we have, whether it's a code blue or a code gray, or the fire drills. So they are very well exposed to that. So, you know, you really just try to do the best you can with everyone involved.
So it sounds like really start with what the kid already knows, what your child is feeling, and sort of stem out, let them guide the conversation.
Yes. But I agree with you about the television, you know, and developmental, you know, wherever the age group of the child is, you know, you do kind of want to shield them from some of the carnage and some of the, you know, maybe material that might not be suitable for them to see and hear, because they might not understand it as well.
And maybe the repeat exposure as well.
Yes.
Sometimes it's hard to decipher when you're a young
Yeah.
child that this is video that was taken a long time ago, this isn't happening again.
Right, yeah, absolutely.
When you do have this conversation with your child, do you think you should have a follow-up? Is it important to then bring it up, even if they don't later, and just ask, you know, how are you feeling about this now? Is it still, do you think one conversation is enough, or do you think you need to at least follow it up?
I think it's probably depends on the child, and I don't feel that it's, you know, a bad thing to say, you know, in the next few days, you know, again, the reassurance and just saying, how are you feeling? Do you have any questions from what happened? You know, and especially when you're in an environment, and I know Sergeant Kane spoke about it, that, you know, especially say elementary grades from K through 4, you know, the 4th graders could be talking about it, and the younger kids might be obviously exposed to it, hearing in the cafeteria, or they're out in the playground. So, you know, you just want to make sure that you acknowledge their feelings, that you acknowledge that it's okay to be sad. It's, you know, because my son certainly was like, it's so sad what happened to these little kids, you know, and it's just horrific. And I can't imagine as a parent, you know, standing there waiting for your child and they're not coming out from the school. So, you know, again, if just for myself and being a school counselor, as I mentioned, just really trying to make sure just the acknowledgement of their feelings, and not just brushing it under the carpet and just saying, well, you'll be okay in a few days and life will get back to normal, because
yeah,
you know,
and as you said, you know, this may bring up past events for some kids, and some kids are more sensitive than others. They may digest this information a little bit differently.
And especially this time of year, you know, as much as the holidays are here, it's very tough. And we just started a grief group with, you know, students that have lost, you know, either a parent or a significant person in their life, and that was planned several weeks ago, and it started on Tuesday, and, you know, it had very positive outcomes. So, you know, as much as Chicopee Public Schools, we can just be as proactive as possible and just really try to be on alert.
Very quickly, schools will frequently say that they have grief counselors on hand if anyone is having a problem. What should a child expect from meeting with a grief counselor? How does that meeting work?
It could be, depending on how many children, depending on the developmental age of the child, you know, that, and I've been a part of the process, you know, sometimes it could be a round table discussion. It might be set up for elementary school. Sometimes they'll have crayons and pieces of paper, and they might draw something, and then the grief counselor might say, tell me about this picture. Why did you draw that? So it might elicit that discussion.
Okay. Very good. Diane
Yeah.
Viccarelli, thank you so much for
you're
joining us
welcome.
from Chicopee Public Schools. Always a pleasure to talk to you.
No, thank you,
Such a
Laura.
terrible subject, but I
Yes.
really do appreciate the great information. And as you'd expect, this tragedy has, of course, got a lot of people talking about gun laws, so we're going to talk to a gun shop owner next. Stay with us. You're watching 22 News in Focus. You're watching 22 News in Focus. Today we're talking about the Newtown, Connecticut shooting that left 26 people dead in an elementary school. 20 were small children. A man used a military-style rifle at Sandy Hook Elementary School after killing his mother. He ultimately took his own life as well. It was a gruesome attack that has gotten people talking once again about gun laws, as you'd expect. And joining us today to talk about this now, we have Mike Weiser, the owner of the Ware Gun Shop. Thanks so much for being here, Mike.
Thank you for inviting
appreciate
me.
it.
Thank you.
So talk to me about what your customers are saying. You know, this is obviously a very polarized debate that people will have, you know, but on the surface, after something like this happens, what are some of the thoughts that go through your mind?
Well, whenever there's an incident, a high-profile incident involving either mass shootings or in particular political assassinations or attempted assassinations, there's always a spike in sales. Partly because people who like guns or who want guns think they won't be able to get them because there'll be a restrictive law that'll pass. Partly because it just, you know, gets kind of out into the air and everybody's, oh, gee, guns, that's interesting, let me go get another one. That certainly has happened in this case. And unless and until everybody knows what legislative or legal reaction will take place, if one will take place, chances are the spike will continue. I've been in and out of the gun business for over 30 years. It is a boom and bust industry. It tends to reflect very much trends in terms of how active the military is or not. And one of the reasons it's such a polarized issue is because even with the tremendous increase in sales, there is a lot of people in this country who they know all about guns, but they simply decide it's not for them. And so what you end up with, for the most part, is people who own guns being in favor of guns and people who don't own guns being against them. And that's why it's so polarized, because the two groups really don't have any basis on which to connect over the issue of ownership.
Do you think that we're going to see some change? Does this feel any different to you than some of the other events that have
Yes,
gotten?
it does, and it does for two reasons. First of all, because it occurred in the Northeast, and even though you know, the shooting in Colorado was very bad, the fact that it occurred in the Northeast, which is the most heavily populated part of the country, which is where the media is, which is where the political focus generally is, tends to make it more of an issue in a sense. Secondly, you know, the school is a sacred place. And it's one thing that you go in randomly into a movie theater, people are shot of different ages and so forth, but you go into a classroom of 5- and 6-year-olds and something significant is going to happen. The last time a school shooting of this level took place was Columbine, and there was a significant federal law that was passed.
How about the gunman, in this case, his choice to use an assault rifle? Do you think that that is going to, that in and of itself, I mean, do you think we're going to see
There's no question that that will be the focus of whatever legislation or whatever legal issues, well, it'll be one of the focuses. You know, understand that it's been, you know, the video game industry, which is really now about 20 years old, is a $6 or $7 billion industry. 95% of all video games that are sold are shooting games. Kids who started playing video games, my son, for example, as a teenager, now are of age. So they've spent a lot of time shooting these kind of guns with lasers, shooting these kind of guns with paintball, and you get to be 21 years old, or in this case, because his mother had them, he was 20, you can get the real thing. So there's no question that there is a connection between the whole way in which kids have been raised in the last generation and the choice of this kind of a weapon.
So you think that video games really do have played some kind of an impact in the development of?
Well, I don't want to.
Sure.
You know, I'm not an expert on such things, obviously, on the relationship of media to how people's psychology is founded. But as I say, there's no question that that you walk into any store, you walk into any game store, and all you see is a wall of video games in which virtually every game has either an assault rifle or a Glock on the cover.
Right. There was that 10-year ban on assault weapons. Massachusetts still
retains it,
yeah,
along with a number of other states.
Yeah.
Right.
So how does that work now? And do you see any changes coming to that? What specifically did Massachusetts maintain?
What Massachusetts maintained was a law that does not permit a dealer to sell a high-capacity magazine more than 10 shots unless it was manufactured before 1994, as well as certain design issues with the guns themselves, which really don't have any effect on how they're used. The problem is that the way the law was written, it grandfathered in magazines, so it went forward. The law went forward, but it wasn't retroactive. Secondly, the law, like all gun laws, really don't cover private sales. And it's really, since there are so many weapons and so many accessories out there, the private sale market is basically unregulated, because I don't know how you could regulate it. And that way you can, it's not that hard to get your hands on a high-capacity magazine, even if you're in a state like Massachusetts.
How do people who say aren't licensed for a gun, how do they get their hands on these guns? I mean, where are they getting them from? In this specific case, the gunman took it from his mother.
Two ways. First of all, in many cases, they get them from the home in which they live. I mean, the kids who went into the school in Columbine, they got those rifles from their parents. So that's one way. The other way, of course, again, is the private sale issue, because the fact that I sell a gun to somebody doesn't mean I necessarily report the sale.
Right.
And if I buy a gun from somebody, it doesn't mean I necessarily report the sale. There is a myth, and I say this purposely because I suspect it'll be part of the legislation, that a lot of these sales go on at gun shows. They really don't, because the way the law works, if you're a dealer at a gun show, you have to do the same background check as if you were sitting inside your own shop. And most of the people selling guns at gun shows are dealers. But again, you can go to a gun show, walk down the aisle, meet another private individual. Gee, I'd like to buy the thing you're carrying over your shoulder. Let's go outside. Here's my money. Here's the gun. Goodbye.
Goodbye. Wow.
And until there's a way of regulating private sales, it's a significant market, and it's one that you can basically buy whatever you want.
So I think anyone could really understand why the people who would walk into a gun store, such as your own, would be upset by any types of changes that may impact them, possibly just because they're going through a very lengthy process, it sounds like.
Correct.
And there are some people who are not going through that process.
The problem is that as long as the moment you start looking at legislation, you start looking at at laws, ultimately you can only do a law against something that, some tangible legal issue. And so by definition, the law would have to impact the legal licensable sale of guns, and that's unfortunately not the problem, except with the question of, I buy a gun, I take it home, I leave it out, my kid, in the case of this kid in Connecticut, gets his hands on it and uses it. Now, Massachusetts and Connecticut have very strict laws on whether or not parents or gun owners are liable if a minor gets a hold of a gun that they own. The laws are fine, but who knows whether or not everybody in their home is locking the guns up properly. In this case of this woman, evidently that was not true.
Sure. The NRA is a very powerful organization, especially, in Washington. They have tight relationships with many politicians. Do you really, and I know I asked this before, that you think that there will be changes, but realistically, I mean, do you really think that there actually will be something that changes when this organization appears to have a lot of power?
What's very interesting is that the NRA for the first time announced, I think it was either early today or late yesterday, that they are going to come out with a major statement. I don't think they would be saying that if they were not willing to at least
make some
create an area in which this could be discussed. What exactly that will be, I don't know. The NRA, there really has never been, again, myth to the contrary, there's never been a congressional or Senate race that turned on the gun issue, because in states that are pro-gun, everybody's pro-gun, and in states where they're not, generally speaking. But what it is it's a very dedicated membership who can be used on a kind of a wedge basis, because people who are NRA members tend to be politically conservative, tend to be Republican, tend to be pro-family values and so forth. So you get your hands on that mailing list, and if you're promoting all those issues, it's a good list, and that's where the NRA draws its strength from. On the other hand, when all is said and done, the NRA also, most of its membership are people with families, with children, and I don't really think they'd feel comfortable if there was an attempt simply to sidestep this in some way.
Mike Weisser, thank you so much for being here. I really do appreciate it with the Ware Gun Shop. Thank you so much for joining us and talking to us about this. And we're going to talk to an expert about how traumatic events like this impact kids and adults. Stay with us. You're watching 22 News in Focus. You're watching 22 News in Focus. Today we're talking about the tragedy in Connecticut that left dozens of people dead and many more dealing with trauma. Here to answer some of our questions about the impact these events have and what leads up to it, we have Dr. Frank Sacco, who's written books on the topic and is also a parenting assessor. Thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure.
Appreciate it. You know, we've talked about a lot of different angles of this horrible, horrible event in Connecticut. We're trying to understand why someone would do something like this. Help us understand that. This is something that you've studied and written books about. Talk to us about what leads up to something like this.
Well, first of all, this is what's called a mission-oriented murder. It has nothing to do with mental illness. It certainly has nothing to do with Asperger's, probably the sweetest group of people you'll ever want to meet. This is a pre-planned event by someone who is grandiose, who is trying to become an avenging angel. They feel somehow their mission is to communicate that something wronged them, that the FBI refers to them as injustice collectors, that they go around with this really high sense of themselves. They feel superior, and this mission was an attack. It was an unpredictable event, where most shootings happen from inside the school by somebody who has been bullied and somebody who's developed a lot of shame. This was a shooting at the school, that this was an unpreventable, unpredictable eruption of mindless evil, basically. This guy planned it. You know, he didn't just say, oh my God, I'm going to go shoot somebody. This is a pre-planned event from a grandiose person that's extremely rare.
How can this not be about, you know, mental health problems, though? The thing is I would be willing to say the majority of people do not have those feelings of needing to kill dozens of people.
Well, it's about disconnection from society. What you'll learn about this young man was he was disconnected, that he was not really, I mean, it's like with video games, that if you have a normal kid that plays one of these video games, they're not going to have the impulse to go out and shoot up the town. This is really about somebody who is experiencing a disconnection from society.
We heard that this man's parents had just gotten divorced, and he'd sort of cut ties with his father and all that. I mean, do you think that's playing it? We're looking at this family that has a lavish lifestyle. You know, he lived in a beautiful house in Newtown, Connecticut, an affluent community. You know, again, what could possibly get someone to do that?
Well, all school shootings were in suburban, they were not in poor schools. Poor schools. This is not a phenomenon of impulse, that you got my girlfriend and I got your, and they shoot each other up. This is really about a disconnection. There's half the people that get married get divorced. I mean, it's not the fact that they lost a parent. It's just a rare form of thinking that somebody would be disconnected in this way and then enact it. So you know, he was in his basement. He was addicted to video games, which more and more of our digital age children are interacting with the video games as if that are masquerading as real relationships. So then that's what pushes the child into sort of action.
The video game industry is going to, you know, hate this, but do you think that video games are contributing to some of these acts of violence?
There's no question that if you are so disposed, it's just like pornography and serial rape. It's not that it causes it, it's that it inflames it. so that there's no question that it inflames an already sensitized child.
So are they desensitized to
Absolutely,
what these
no
events?
question about it. No, no question about it. But if you're a kid, a normal kid, you got parents around you. It's not what's in the box; it's what's around the box. You know, it's the people that are around that really determine how a kid reacts to a video game. They know that it's not real. They know that it's not. My kids grew, my son grew up playing that game all over the place.
So what do parents at home do? I mean, most kids don't do this, as you've said, so how does a parent know if their child is exposing themselves to this too much? What are some of those signs that would...
Well, I mean, video games can be a parent's best friend. I mean, it gets them peace and quiet.
Keeps them quiet for a while.
Really gets them peace and quiet. So the whole point in parenting is I make jokes about it. It's a giant screw job. It's all one way. You have to put the time and energy into your kids. You got to really be there. You got to be active in their life. Kids need just you. They don't need all this other stuff. So the amount of disconnection that occurs in a kid is really up to a parent. The kid will only disconnect to the extent that the parent will allow that.
So maybe while they're playing video games, they're disconnecting themselves from the rest of society and life. They're not, hanging out with people. Is that what this is? This is like not socializing with people.
Correct.
And not socializing even with your own
Correct.
family.
And enhancing a sense of power, and you can run around and do all these things, and you can interact with people. We have programs where we find kids who are literally trapped in their rooms and have assumed different identities through online gaming and stuff like that. We're able to sort of extract them using a program we call therapeutic mentoring that is really only here in Massachusetts that Medicaid allows that to occur. So we go in and we roust them. We get them out of the bedrooms. We get them out into Boys and Girls Clubs, and we try to give them some socialization.
So parents at home who are watching their kids walk into their bedrooms to go play some video games, again, what are those signs that they're spending too much time in front of this?
I mean, how much can you do it?
But what are the signs? You know what I mean? Is it that they just don't want to hang out with friends anymore? I mean, how do you know that? Because, like I said, parents aren't you can't just pull the games on your kids all together. You know what I mean? It's something...
The key is to pay attention.
Right.
I mean, if a parent is paying attention, they're going to know their kids. If their kids are that's all they do, okay, it's a matter of balance.
Yeah.
If this is something they do to relax before a basketball game, something to do after they do their homework, I mean, if this is their social world, you've got a problem.
All right, very good. I think we're going to take a short break, and we're going to continue this conversation with you. Dr. Sacco, thank you so much. So stay with us. You're watching 22 News in Focus. You're watching 22 News in Focus. Since the top of the hour, we've been talking about the tragedy in Connecticut. We're back here now with Dr. Frank Sacco, who's written books on the topic and is also a parenting assessor. Thank you so much again for being here. And we were just talking about video games and what could possibly contribute to making somebody want to do something as awful as this. You've looked into school shootings. Unfortunately, there's been several in our history now. How does this relate to other school shootings that you've seen?
Well, the major difference is that this was a shooting at a school. It wasn't really a school shooting. Typically, what's the same is that it's a family weapon. They kill a parent on the way. There's half a dozen to a dozen examples of like Luke Woodham and Red Lake, where they basically they kill the parent, and then they go to school and kill other students. There's the disconnection, the video games. A lot of that stuff is very common in the school shooter. Suburban school, great community. Just like what's different is that usually the shame of bullying is involved with it. That the shooter has been bullied at the school and has been targeted by his classmates, and that generates the shame, and then the shame will turn to rage, and then that rage will be the avenging angel will emerge.
So, I mean, is there any reason he would go into a kindergarten and first grade classroom? I mean, it's
symbolic.
Right.
I mean, the thing about a mission-oriented killing is it's symbolic. He was shooting a symbol, that his grandiosity made it so that that his pain or his message was more important than the lives of 27 people.
Just awful. And what's the point of killing a parent? You said that this is something that's typical in these types of shootings.
Pretty typical, yeah. I mean,
Why?
it's.
I'm sorry. Tell me.
I wish I know.
Yeah.
No, it's really a part of a young mind. I mean, the other thing is sort of a failure to launch. There's a 20-year-old kid. They're getting older and older. If you noticed,
Sure.
at Virginia Tech. And
Yeah.
it's not just high schools or middle schools. It's now an older phenomenon. Usually it's a reaction to. It's very similar to suicide that you will see in most of what's like other school shootings is that the kid end up turning the gun on himself. That this is about like suicide, that at that moment the person feels like there's no escaping this, that this is really the only way to make this fair, is to go on this rampage, and then people will understand. And that's just, it's not typical mental illness, and it's not typical Asperger's, it's not typical of any of those things. It's a very rare form of violence.
Speaking of the Asperger's and the mental health, do you think that there are enough resources to address people with severe mental health? Do you think that this is something that is going untreated and should also be something? We've heard the president say that he's addressing gun policy. Do you think that mental health does need to be looked at again?
Well, I mean, of course. I mean, the more resources you put at a problem, the better. The more you invest in it. But there was no way that every clinic in the country has kids that look scarier than this kid. This kid didn't have a big, long mental health record. This kid would not have. You wouldn't have been able to force him into psychotherapy. He's 20 years old. He's his own signee.
Right.
So you're not getting this kid's not jumping out at a mental health professional. You could have had Sigmund Freud in a room, and you wouldn't have figured this one out.
Yeah, this one, I mean, everything from the school security to, totally unpredictable. This has to be one of the ones.
Heroic efforts on the parts of the teachers, and I think that all the first responders are going to have this on their mind for the rest of their life. And I hope that the follow-up, if there is something to do about this, it really has to do with those first responders, and sort of giving a nod to teachers, and like hug a teacher kind of thing. Really, they are. I mean, they're amazing.
Oh, they really are, and we really, give thanks to all of our first responders. We've been talking a lot about our kids here locally and how, we can talk to them and get them through this as well. In your opinion, what about the students who were in the building, in that school, may have heard it? I know that one of the young girls who was killed had a twin brother in the room next door, How about these kids? I mean, our hearts just go out to them. Do you think that there is any chance that they can move on without having post-traumatic stress disorder?
They're going to have acute stress disorder, at least. And this is going to be, I mean, it's like the Chowchilla. You're probably too young to remember this one. Somebody kidnapped a whole group of kids and buried them in a bus. And I mean, those kids grew up. They had treatment. Those kids are probably going to need some consultation. They were real close to it. The impact of the stress happens like a ripple when you throw something in the water. The closer you are to the explosion, the more you're going to get it. It's like sort of a flashbulb effect. So these kids, the resiliency is something that varies across childhood. So some kids will have a real hard time with it, and some kids will be able to integrate the rest of their lives pretty quickly.
What kind of body language, or what are some of the signs that a child may be having a difficult time with this? Even here, even the kids who have been exposed to this here, we've heard that they're scared to go to school. You know what I mean? What are some of those signs that kids may give you?
The best thing to look for is shift in functioning. So if a parent will know, or a teacher will know when a kid is off track. They usually do it this way, now they're not doing it this way. They usually are into this, and they're really into it, now they're not into this. They used to do their homework without telling, no. So you look for shift in functioning, and that's usually an indication that a child is preoccupied with something unhealthy.
What are some of the conclusions that you think are going to come out of this? I mean, you work with the FBI, you've spoken with them, you know, in the writings of your books and all that. What do you think are some of those conclusions or lessons that this is going to end up, you know, bringing to the forefront?
I think the first thing is the role of the school in society. The school really is the soul of the community. And it's where we raise our children. It's you know, the value of schools now is really, you know, it became a symbolic target for a rare devilish act. I mean, I don't, you know, but it really does highlight the role the school plays in civil society, and that we should really invest our time, energy, and resources into schools so that we can really maintain them as safe places, because really children are hurt all the time by each other, probably much more than you know, it really brings it, these rare events really crystallize it.
Yeah.
And you think, oh, you know, but really every day, you know, kids are being, child abuse is at an all-time high. Child neglect is at an all-time high.
Yeah.
You know, you got to love your children. You got to see the value of children. You got to recognize that our society is based on having healthy children. They grow up into healthy adults, etc. So I think that what's going to come out of this really is sort of the value of innocence. You know, protecting the vulnerable. You know, whether they're young or they're old. You know, and the value of schools as the souls of the community.
And going back to that shooter, you know, again, how do you possibly predict when someone, for example, after this event, there have been a number of lockdowns in schools across the country. There's been a lot of just ripple effect, people responding to this. And, you know, you would imagine that people are going to report people who they feel are suspicious, which, you know, is good to an extent. But what are some of those signs that somebody actually may be a threat to their classroom, their friends, their family?
There's a couple of schools of thought on that, and threat assessment is a very technical thing. You need an educator, a mental health professional, and a law enforcement to really have a good threat assessment team. And threats are made all the time. You know, the cheerleader list, this is a list of kids I hate, and stuff like that. Though everything should be, and all of these school shootings, by the way, have what the FBI calls leakage, which is suicide also has this, where there's communication, there's a dialogue about what the intention is with the person. And I think that that's really early warning, that if you develop programs at school where any of this information is not, I mean, that's why the punitive approach is really unhealthy, because it cuts off that leakage, it cuts off that communication from the young people, because the young people are not going to tell the old people, it's the young people that tell the young people. And if somebody in that peer culture doesn't say something, you have no chance at intervening in a school shooting.
So when somebody, you know, writes something down or makes any kind of a threat, those things, that's like your sure sign, because that's what typically is happening in these
Well,
events.
you should assess the threat. That's really what it's about.
Very good. Dr. Frank Sacco, thank you so much for your input. Really, I really do appreciate you coming on and talking to you. I'm sure we'll be hearing from you more again in the future as well. So thank you so much. And we're going to have the last word for you after the break. Stay with us. You're watching 22 News in Focus. You're watching 22 News in Focus. On Friday, December 14th, an unthinkable tragedy happened in Newtown, Connecticut. A gunman killed his own mother, then went to an elementary school and killed dozens more people, including 20 children. This tragedy has shaken not only residents of the community, but people right here in Western Massachusetts. It has a lot of people asking themselves why something like this could happen, how it can happen, and how we can prevent it happening in the future. And that is what we talked about over the last hour. If you've missed any of our program, you can watch it in full on our website at wwlp.com. Thanks to our guests for joining us. Thanks for watching at home. Take care. Have a wonderful Sunday.